Okay, hi everybody. This is the November edition of our monthly webinar. So thanks for those guys who have come to join us for this month. And we, as with previous webinars, we're picking specific topics, and then we're just having some discussions about them. So let me just share with you my slideshow, and we'll get started. Yeah, so this is a series of assessment literacy development webinars. I guess we've been doing these now for about the past 6 months or so. Today's webinar is sponsored by our good friends at ITEP, the International Test of English Proficiency. Actually, ITEP has been sponsoring lots of stuff related to some of the previous work I was doing with classroom assessment too. So a big thanks to them. We're getting into, the topic today is test security, and we'll be getting into issues of plagiarism and cheating and all kinds of interesting and exciting things like that. I guess a lot of what we're talking about will be about large scale testing, but we're also talking about classroom assessment too. Okay, so, and I guess we'll talk some about online assessment and keeping things secure online too. So the assessment literacy webinars, and we're just promoting good practices related to assessment. So just a reminder of a couple of things, because they're connected with what we're talking about today with test security. So you know now the main qualities of good tests. So we have reliability, where we're concerned with consistency of measurement, validity, we're actually measuring what we intend to measure. And the other point, I guess that's not here about validity, is that the decisions that are made based on test results and test scores are also valid and good. So that's an element of validity. And then practicality is just that the resources are available to administer and score tests. And as you know, I mean, I guess when we're talking about things like cheating and plagiarism, I mean, the key issue is validity. So the validity of test results and test scores get compromised. And once that happens, the validity of the test itself or the scores get compromised, then we have big problems. A few more just things to remind you about testing and assessment, particularly summative assessment if we're talking about the classroom version. So remember the two key components to focus on for almost any test, whether it's a large scale test or something happening at the classroom level. One is the task or tasks that students are asked to complete, right? So whether it's a presentation students are doing in the classroom, or they're doing a 4-hour large scale proficiency test, right? There's always a task or a series of tasks that are there. And the second one is, of course, the scoring. So it's just a simple way to think about any kind of either summative test happening in the classroom or large scale tests. And if we focus on having both of those elements as good as we can make them, then usually it results in a good test. And if either one of them is compromised or flawed, then these are some problem areas. And just a reminder of some key questions that we consider with tests. What is it that you're assessing with the test? What skills or abilities are being assessed? And again, what tasks do students have to complete? And the third one is, yeah, just the scoring. How's their performance scored? So I find that just those ideas are just key ones to keep in mind when we're looking at or considering any test or test circumstance. So we talk about the different challenges and choices that we face either as classroom teachers or as test makers, or just people, whether we're accepting test scores from large scale tests. And then the whole issue of cheating, it really I guess it is one of the major challenges that we can often deal with either at the classroom level or with large scale tests. Okay. So the article that I sent you, I'll just do a brief summary of some of the things that are in that article, and then we'll get into some discussion about test security. And the article is from, this is Ardeshir Garampeya at the University of Cambridge. And this is from the Companion to Language Assessment. So this is from 2014, and he just makes a few points that I'll remind everybody about. And one is just the need for professional vigilance about threats to the accuracy and dependability of test information. Okay. Cheating may directly put into question the validity of a test. Again, that key point about validity when we're talking about cheating. So any single exam score obtained by fraudulent means is not valid, right? It's not a fair reflection, as he says, of a candidate's abilities. And he also makes the point that results obtained through cheating have a negative impact on the validity of scores obtained by other candidates. And just this idea that, I mean, if you have a limited number of spaces for a job or for a university, the candidate who succeeds through fraud denies opportunities to other people. Okay, so what kind of things count as cheating? I guess here are some of the things that he reminds us about. So cheating can take a wide variety of forms, and it can involve any of the stakeholders in the testing process, including the candidates. Teachers also can be involved, and people who are responsible for administering a test. And cheats can be motivated by material rewards, such as access to life chances. I was reading about this somewhere else, and the point is that it's not the test score that students get, of course, that's the key thing. It's the opportunity, the life opportunities that score allows, okay? So cheaters may be motivated by access to life chances, personal needs for competitiveness or lack of self-confidence. And yeah, in the case of school exams, sometimes there's publication of league tables. And he says that whatever the causes, yeah, exam boards and agents, just that responsibility to, that responsibility to discourage cheating on tests and just minimize cheating whenever possible. We get one more definition in that article from this person, and it notes that just that it gives an examinee this unfair advantage over other people. Okay, and that's a good point to underline. Plagiarism, as you guys, especially if you're in the classroom teacher, if you're a classroom teacher, you're probably very familiar with just that act of cheating associated with essay writing. And we get this definition that's in the article: to steal and pass off as one's own ideas or words without crediting the source. And then he provides just the following types of acts of plagiarism. And you can just take a quick look there. You probably remember these from the article. Here's a question for you, and I'll leave it in screen share. Well, let me just stop screen share for a moment and ask you. I was talking to just students. We were talking about plagiarism, actually, not in the English context. So if a student uses an essay or things from one class and uses it in another class, is that plagiarism? And you plagiarize, and students like, you can't plagiarize from yourself. Is she right?
Can I say something about that?
Please go ahead, Teddy.
I didn't know that was plagiarism until I moved to the United States.
In
Brazil, for me, it was okay.
Okay, so what is your professional opinion? Is it plagiarism?
Well, if the student doesn't put in any other effort into the essay or modifying or doing or adding to it, I think it is, like, because you're just reusing something that you already did.
Okay.
But Nadia, before I moved here, no, I didn't think that was plagiarism.
Nadia says it's self-plagiarism, but I think it's kind of a contradiction though, because I mean it's you're taking ideas or words from somebody else. So
can I just add to that there was actually this question in, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the ethicist in the New York Times Magazine.
No.
Every week there's sort of this series of ethical dilemmas, and this same question was posed to the ethicist, who concluded that because ethics is about how we morally affect society, that we are actually, when we self-plagiarize, we're only cheating ourselves. So it's laziness on the part of the student, because you're expected in each class to perform some sort of task which makes you a more informed, more intelligent person, I guess. And when you don't do that and you just pass off the same work again and again, you're cheating yourself because you haven't gone through the effort. But it's not actually an ethical issue because you're not affecting anyone else. I don't. That was his answer. I don't know how anyone else feels about that.
That's interesting, and a good way of addressing it also. But it's yeah, it's sometimes it's curious whether it crosses the line or not. Just a quick anecdote to share. I mean, I think we all have our plagiarism or cheating stories. Mine is it's a favorite one from a friend of mine, and we worked together in Vancouver. And my friend Dan, he was teaching an essay writing class, and he decided to write. He was looking for a model essay to give the students. And he couldn't really find one, so he said, "I decided to write my own." And he wrote a 5-paragraph essay about how to quit smoking. And he said he actually quit smoking, and he gave the reasons. The reasons why, here are the reasons why I quit smoking. And he had his 3 reasons and his intro and stuff. Gave it out to students, and that was the model essay, and it was all fine, well, and good. About 2.5 months later, next semester, he was doing essay writing, and somebody submitted that essay. So that essay was like somebody submitted it, and Dan said, "I couldn't believe it." And he said, I called it the kid, his 19-year-old kid from wherever, but I talked to him after class and said, "You didn't write this essay." And the guy said, "Yes, I did." And Dan said, "No, you didn't. I did." And the guy said, "No, you didn't. I did." And he refused to say that it wasn't his essay. Dan was like, I was going to choke him. But it was very funny. So this essay that the teacher wrote, the student came back later and said, "No, that's mine."
So we use the word like original. We always, I mean, as a writing teacher, we say that the text that you submit for this class should be original work. That means that, if you wrote about quitting smoking at some point in life, you want to touch the topic again, that's okay, but you have to tackle it from a different perspective. So it is work that this is the first time you write about, but the topic, you may revisit a topic.
I see. That's a good point.
And the self-plagiarism, I actually attended workshops and read articles that they listed as self-plagiarism.
Really?
I didn't come up with that. Yes.
I didn't know that. There we go.
Yeah, I might have the source somewhere, but I can find it out if you want.
Well, and I think you also have to consider the institutional perspective, and that may vary from campus to campus. On my campus, it's in the code of conduct that this is plagiarism if you're using one essay for 2 separate areas or 2 separate topics or 2 separate classes.
Yeah.
I think in my institution too, without informing the teacher. So you actually can ask the teacher if you can turn in a paper that you've already written, but that has to be with the consent of the teacher.
Yeah.
But that's a good point too.
Yeah. It's but you all raise a point also that I mean, I guess it's necessary for institutions, or whether it's a language program or a university, that these things are kind of explicitly defined, because the consequences can be very serious for students. And just something else that comes to mind. I remember teaching in Vancouver, and I thought I had a student who was plagiarizing because the essays, the things he was writing, and it was very good stuff. And I would cut and paste and put it into Google, and I couldn't find it. But I was writing comments like, "This is very good. Is this your work, or did somebody else help you with it or something?" But anyway, the final exam came around, and I thought, well, there's no way the student is plagiarizing on the final exam, so I'm really going to catch her and see what she's actually able to do without any help. And she did the final exam, and it was great. It was a great final exam, and she was a great writer. And I almost made a big mistake by accusing this girl of plagiarism. And I was lucky that I was reminding myself to be careful about it. But in the end, she actually was quite a good writer. So just it can be dangerous territory, I guess, also for a bit unsure of what we're dealing with. Okay, let me just move ahead, everybody. So he writes a little bit about plagiarism, and he's writing about just the issue of academic dishonesty. And he says that educational researchers have repeatedly found academic dishonesty to be disturbingly common So these are people who are doing research. And more common, that is generally believed by educators. But I mean, educators are kind of suspicious too about cheating and plagiarism that's going on. Many colleges and higher education institutions now use commercial online detecting software tools to check the originality of an essay. And you may be familiar with this. Maybe the institution that you work at uses some external company to check essays, like Turnitin, etc. Okay. A few more things from Garampea. He talks about cheating and high-stakes language assessment. All high-stakes language tests are expected to provide a snapshot of candidates' language proficiency at the time of testing. And the results are often used to make decisions about candidates' preparedness for using the language. And he just reminds us that with the increasing importance of test performance, sometimes for immigration, access to higher education, etc., it becomes very high stakes, right? So the stakes associated with the test results will increase. And it's particularly true for international standardized language proficiency tests. And he just makes the note, and I highlighted here, that we could argue that cheating is an inevitable consequence and a byproduct of high stakes testing. And considering the potential results of doing well on a test or doing poorly on a test, especially if it's connected to getting a visa or getting a promotion or things like that, you can see why the high stakes lead to the chances that people take. He says that in part of the paper we have these cheating detection indices, and so he says there are many statistical and otherwise methods to detect cheating behaviors on a language test. For example, the Angoff index. I was up all night reading this and trying to understand it, and I really couldn't understand it, so I'm just going to skip through it, and we'll invite somebody else to come back later and explain it, kind of thing. But there are statistical measures that test companies use. And so he says that, so they report several cheating detection methods for high stakes language assessments. And all of the methods, they look for things like this: unusually high scores on one measure in relation to others, right? The writing score is very high, but the other parts aren't. Identical or similar patterns of responses, okay? Or other patterns. And he mentions also that some of the large scale testing companies, they're very careful about how much information they relay about how they what kind of cheating detection methods they use. Okay, just a few more things from the article. He characterized 10 different classes of cheaters. See if you recognize any of these. We have the impersonator. I was checking my spelling there. I think it's okay. The proxy test taker. Okay, someone that takes the test on behalf of someone else. I was talking to Tani earlier, and we were talking about a case of this actually. The smuggler is someone who brings the test, bringing materials into the test, providing an advantage, writing answers on their hand or something. And you all remember that from high school, I think, or some of you do. The storyteller, individual who memorizes test items only to retell them later to others. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's producing tests, and he was telling me that in a context he's aware of, that there were individuals, they would pay people to take a test and get people to memorize different parts of a test. If you have 20 items on the reading, we get people to memorize different parts, and they would come out later and they would record those. The chain gang is a group that memorizes and sells items to the internet. The time traveler, person who shares test materials used in multiple time zones. Collaborators, people who work together. Get a few more here. The Robin Hood category, test takers who are not involved, but they change student responses with or without students' knowledge. I'm not sure about that name, where that name comes from, but the beginning of the article, it talks about teachers. I mean, here in the United States, I think in Atlanta, a whole group of teachers changing test scores. The hacker is the person who infiltrates computer systems to change candidate results. Ticket scalper gets to see an earlier version or free version of the test, and then he can sell it later. And the last one is the insider, steals the questions and then sells the results. So these are 10 different categories. He says that people in the later category are most difficult to identify as they work for the testing organizations and know how to avoid being recognized. That's interesting, that you might have people that purposely go to work for some of the major testing organizations. And just a few final things. He says that cheating is an inevitable consequence and a byproduct of high stakes testing. As the stakes increase, so does the level of cheating. And there's been a significant increase in cheating in this century. The battle between cheaters who try to gain advantage and exam boards or teachers try to protecting the integrity of the test is that ongoing struggle that's never ending. That's what Garen Paya, how he kind of ends his article. Okay, I'm gonna get out of screen share mode here and just having a discussion about, again, we're talking about just challenges and choices, some consequences. First of all, we'll talk a little bit about large scale testing, and then in a few minutes, we'll go to classroom assessment. So, I mean, just a general discussion in terms of large scale testing that your institution is either doing, and it could be like testing large groups of people or using an external test. What kind of challenges or issues are you dealing with?
I would bring up an experience that I had, and which I'd be interested in hearing what others think. And this was with a large scale testing situation. And it was actually when we were still able to have test centers. We've given tests. I've done testing for 20 years in situations, and we have, when you do TESOL testing, or not TESOL, but the ESL testing, you have to put up signs everywhere. If it's TOEFL, that if you cheat, it's a $250,000 fine. You can have all this happening. You can, all these things. We caught, and I didn't know how to identify, but he was an impersonator. Now that we have the terminology for it. And I mean, I knew that the student whose passport I was looking at was not the student who was sitting here. And so we kept the passport as we were told to do. We sent all the documentation into the TOEFL people. And I was extremely disappointed because all they did was cancel the student's score. There was nothing else that was done. So my issue would be, when you have large scale testing done, and what I thought, I was disappointed in the credibility of the testing organization. Have others had that experience?
So you mean that he got off with a slap on the wrist, and you thought it should have been?
Well, if you're going to say you're going to do something, then do it. If you're not going to do it, then don't tell the people who are giving the test for you that they have to, that they have to go to great lengths to make sure that your credibility is maintained. My issue is with them asking the people who are, quite frankly, we were confronted by this student in a very, in a situation where he was very upset and angry that we had kept his passport.
Yeah, it's a good question, Patty. Anybody having that about just there are rules in place, but for some reason they're not enforced?
Well, I can say that, as teachers, we're all very humanistic types, or at least most of us are. I'm not, but one thing that's possible, and I don't think most of us would go to this length, but if he's entered the U.S. on a false TOEFL score, he's actually committed visa fraud, and he can be arrested and put in prison.
Well, that's what they say, Michael. But here again,
no, but it's not the TOEFL that's going to do that. It's you that's going to report it to immigration, and then it's between you and immigration. It has nothing to do with ETS.
Well, this was a student who was currently enrolled in the United States. He wasn't entering. I think he was taking it to transfer to another school. So you're right. It may have been that he would have been falsifying documentation to the other school if he'd been able to succeed in what was happening.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? What other issues are you dealing with large scale assessment? Any concerns about accepting test scores from some of the large scale companies, or any issues with that?
Well, yeah, in our case at University of Delaware, we recruit a lot from China. Many of our students are Chinese, and we know for a fact that they're coming in on false TOEFL scores, but they're actually earned TOEFL scores. They probably got imposters taking the test for them, but they show up and their real English proficiency is nothing like what the TOEFL scores indicate. But we're sort of passing them along through our ESL program and into mainstream university classes. And there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of pushback from sort of freshman, sophomore level professors.
You mean that, and because they see that these individuals clearly should not be in the classes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we do have certified TOEFL. The issue is we do have certified TOEFL scores.
Yeah.
Dedicated TOEFL scores, and we can't say who's who, really, right?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, and I hear people will say, for example, that, I mean, I've heard people say that I hate the TOEFL test, and they have no faith at all in its ability to to measure people's proficiency, and it could be TOEFL or IELTS or whatever. But I mean, the point is that, I mean, these tests are made by professionals in the field, in their area. They also know, I mean, that the part of the test creation is trying to mitigate any kind of cheating or anything like that. But I mean, I think there's this impression that you can go away for a test camp in a weekend, and you can go and do a 3 or 4 hour test in English and get a high score. And I think that seems rare or unlikely to me. More common, I think, what's going on is, Mike, what you're talking about is that the imposters, or their fake test results, or fake, there's some fakery or dishonesty going on with the reports and things that are submitted, But I mean, I think still in general, most of the major tests do a pretty good job of determining people's proficiency. But as you say, Mike, then you get the authentic and legitimate score reports, and sometimes you can tell them apart from the ones that aren't authentic.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is not that TOEFL doesn't do a good job but in some cases we have students that we suspect paid someone else to take the test for them.
Yeah, of course.
That's the issue, really.
Yeah.
Right. And then that's compounded by the fact that you've also got students who have gone through courses that just prepare them for the TOEFL or the IELTS.
Yeah.
So their proficiency doesn't really match their ability to perform on the test, because they've sort of learned how to beat the test.
Right, but there's some research also that, I mean, they've done research even in places like China about test prep courses, and they found that the test prep courses don't increase people's scores very much. It increases their familiarity with the test, but it's like, I mean, if I'm, for example, if my knowledge of Spanish is minimal, and if I go and do a Spanish proficiency test, I mean, if I could go and do some test prep course for a weekend, and I'm sure it's not going to help me very much or at all in my performance on that test. So, Eric, how about in your context out there? I mean, in terms of the testing that's going on at your institution, or even, if you guys are administering any large scale tests?
We haven't been so much recently. We've done we've done the TOEFL ITP, the digital version.
Yeah.
One thing I was gonna mention though, kind of related to this then, was the on the message boards for both TESOL and Education USA. There's been a lot of talk about Duolingo and Validity, especially with Duolingo. I just read something this morning, and I thought, oh, that kind of fits into what we're going to talk about here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's I've seen some of those message boards also, and I mean, it's one of the things. For example, I was we produce an in-house test. I'm working with Tani about it, just a proficiency test at the university. Oh, sorry, we were using another test, a shorter test, to determine people's proficiency coming into our English program. But the test was 90 minutes. It's a commercial test, is 90 minutes. And I talked to one of the other testing companies, and their test was 4 hours. And I just talked to them and said, "What do you think about that test?" And they said, "Well, it's not valid." So the one idea is that the longer the test is, it has more validity, but you can still have a valid and reliable test that is a 90-minute test. Now, Eric, if you're talking about a test that's 20 minutes or 30 minutes, that's a completely different area in terms, and you can see why people are raising major validity issues. And one of the things sometimes with some of the newer tests is the type of tasks that people are asked to do. Again, what kind of tasks are students asked to do? And the task could be, for example, here's 20 words. Which ones are actually English words? Right? And it's like there are very few tests who have that kind of task, because in terms of authenticity in real world, in real life, I mean, that's that kind of thing doesn't happen very much. So, but that's a good point about test validity. Okay, Gabrielle, welcome back, and just can you tell us a little bit about it in just the context in Brazil, and which, first of all, we're just talking about large scale testing, and I mean, what about at your institution, or if your institution is administering tests to many students, which is also a version of the large scale testing? Any plagiarism or cheating issues that you guys have down there?
Oh, I just came back. I was disconnected. So you were asking me?
Yeah, I'm just asking,
Okay.
but just to, in Brazil, and in terms of large scale testing, whether you're using an external test or a test that you guys produce and is administered widely, any test security issues that you face?
Yeah, we do. We have our center produces the proficiency test for the post-graduation programs in the university.
Right.
And our biggest issue is enforcing the rules. We have candidates that don't respect the time to enter the building because we close down the building, and they don't understand, that they can't enter the building after the test starts. So enforcing the rules are our biggest issue. And then when Patricia was mentioning that case, I think we also had similar cases here, because this is a high stakes exam. They have to pass it to get accepted in the post-graduation program.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the terminology, but now I know that they're called impersonators. So we one thing that we do is collect the fingerprints too. And if it gets too serious, we have to call the police, and the whole involve the whole university.
Yeah.
So things get more serious. We do also have that other type, the smugglers who bring dictionaries to the test. They are allowed to bring dictionaries into the tests area.
Yeah.
But they can't borrow from someone. And again, when they are in the classroom and they realize that they didn't read the document that said that they could bring the dictionary, they want to borrow one from the other candidate, and we say that we can't. And the test administrator, the proctor who's in the classroom, needs to check the dictionary to see if there aren't any notes or anything specific for there, because the tests are divided into content areas like health sciences, engineering, and humanities.
Yeah.
So if they didn't make any kind of notes, and we always catch people with special glossaries or stuff, that they prepare for the test.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're always going to get people who are going to try to take an easy route. But again, considering also some of the high stakes involved with some of the testing, it's not surprising that it sometimes happens. Okay, what about classroom assessment? Just at the classroom level and stuff as teachers, in terms of students cheating or plagiarizing or you know, issues at the classroom level. Any how problematic, if at all, is that in your context? Maybe Mike, if I could ask you to just comment first about it in your context out there, about just in terms of classroom assessment, any major challenges with that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, a new issue that I've been running up against is the use of, we use Turnitin. I'll just preface by saying,
Yeah.
So it's, but what I suspect is a use of automated translators, because sometimes I'll get picture perfect grammar from students who just don't have that ability. Or another thing, I'll just give you an example, is like we're doing, I don't know how many people are familiar with this book, The Alchemist. It's sort of one of the few adult novels that's like really simple to read, right? And so I use it as part of an extensive reading program. And 3 words that keep coming up are, if you've read it in English, if you're from Brazil, you may have read it in Portuguese, I don't know, but 3 words that keep coming up are, you know, there's a character who's only called the Englishman, there's Santiago, and there's one more. Anyway, I'll get, you know, these sort of short answer responses that instead of saying the Englishman, say the British, which appears nowhere in the book. Or instead of Santiago, I'll get San Diego, which again appears nowhere in the book. But those are, Santiago and San Diego are synonymous. And it leads me to think that they're probably writing in Chinese and having some automated translator program do it for them. Oh, and there was another one anyway that's similar. They wouldn't have gotten that vocabulary from anywhere, yet they use it, right?
That is very interesting. And Mike, and so how do you deal with that? Do you let that slide, or do you? I mean,
I ignore it, because actually two of the things we're doing with the book are having small group discussions. But another thing we're doing is we're having them essentially practice short answer format for when they go to their university classes, and they need to be familiar with this kind of format. So they are actually giving me short answer format. So in that sense, they're completing the task. But what they're not doing is using their English abilities. And of course, we want them to go through the process of you know, writing, of developing their writing.
Yeah.
Not write in Chinese and have a computer translate it. So
that is very interesting, and I guess it's the other side too, and just in terms of reading also. And I remember just reading about this, that some students, they're not, if you're giving them something to read in a reading class, you know, a couple of pages or whatever, and for some of them, they can just point the phone at it and get that translation going on in their own language. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, but is that cheating? Is that cheating? So if I have an essay to write, and okay, I'm writing it in Spanish or Portuguese or Hindi or whatever I'm writing it in, I'm going to write it in my own language, and then I'm just going to use translation software and turn it into English. Is that still cheating?
Well, I think it's dishonest if the express purpose of the course is to develop your English proficiency.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's completely counterproductive, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that I would do, like in that scenario, that there is a lot of like words that are being translated, and obviously those are not the words that fit in. I mean, if I just test ESL, there is going to be something about vocabulary in the rubric I use. So I think that's where I would just, you know, at least mark it off there. At least I'm acknowledging that the vocabulary you're using is not the one that fits in your sentence, basically, or is related to what we were reading.
Yeah, it's Nadia, it's a good point. And just about you know, if you have directions or information like that, whether it's in the directions for the assignment or it's built in as part of the rubric, that can simplify things. Just a point that I was talking earlier at the beginning, and just that when you consider testing or assessment, you consider those two things, the tasks and the scoring. And I think sometimes that teachers can make good or poor decisions about tasks which can either increase or minimize testing or cheating that goes on. For example, if you ask a student, okay, I want you to write an essay comparing American and Brazilian culture, for example, right? And guaranteed, I mean, if I was a student, I mean, it takes me a split second to get onto Google and start looking for that online, because so I think the task itself almost leads some students to go, because it's you can go online and find those answers. So, but sometimes, I've mentioned this before, what I get some of my students to write reports. They have to summarize something and write an opinion of it. Now, there isn't anything available online where they can go and find that. So my point is that, and I purposely set up the task like that, because I can be reasonably assured that it's their work. So sometimes the tasks and things teachers ask students to do can decrease or increase some of the cheating or test security issues that go on, I think. What else? What about teaching online? And it has, Tani, if I ask you, bring you in a little bit here, because you've been teaching some English courses online, and earlier in the year, is test security and cheating issues, are they any more frequent or more complicated than teaching in regular classes?
I think so. Well, I think the main reason too is that because you're not face-to-face, because when you're giving a test face-to-face, you can watch the students take the test, right? So I think that minimizes a lot of the issues that we're facing online. And I think, especially with assessment and teaching online, teachers have had to become more creative when it comes to creating the tests themselves to minimize cheating and plagiarism, or the ability to cheat or plagiarize. So I think we have, in a way that has been good, in my opinion, because we have had to think and rethink our own assessment procedures and tasks that we're asking students to do in order to account for possible cheating and plagiarism.
Yeah.
Right?
So do you mean, Tanya, would you say that assessing students online maybe requires more assessment literacy in terms of on behalf of the teacher, or maybe it helps increase assessment literacy of the teacher in terms of the decision making?
I think both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And creativity.
Yeah.
And more research, and figuring out what other people are doing that it's working for them. And at least it's making, I think, people think more about assessment.
Yeah.
Because once you see that everybody's cheating, and then you're like, okay, but I need to do something about it. And what can be done on my end as a teacher when I create my tests or when I use the tests to make sure that we have reliable results.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I'd like to hear a bit more, like, in detail about that, because actually one of the dilemmas I'm facing is as we try to be more creative in our test design to compensate for dishonesty. So for example, in the receptive skills, and I know now, like in my program, a lot of people are trying to do listening and reading tests where the students have to produce something, and the entire score will be based on a language production. So I'm concerned about the validity. In their attempt to become more creative to overcome cheating, I think we're sort of eating away at validity. So I'm wondering what anybody's thought about, done about that.
That's it's the first thing I was thinking, Mike, about your it sounds like you, in a context like that, you're minimizing or decreasing the validity of the test, as you've said.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Tani?
I was thinking, it actually, like, you try to solve a problem and you end up creating another problem, right? So I was thinking here, we have to be very careful. Like, if you're asking a student to produce, let's say, a summary based on to see if they understood the reading, right? We have to be very careful how we're grading that summary. If we cannot grade the writing skills or something, because we're trying to see if they understood the reading, right? But then I see the same way when you're thinking about, if you just do multiple choice to take the writing aspect out of it, then it's easier to cheat. So you're trying to fix a problem, but then you end up creating a validity problem, because then there an interference of skills, right?
Right.
So
Mike, what about it's a good point, Tenny. Mike, what about if you had, for example, if it's a you're assessing listening or reading skills, and if it's a summarizing task, and you just have a simple checklist, or for example, the teacher makes a checklist that after listening or reading to this, these are the 3 or 4 points they should pick up on. These are the 3 or 4 main ideas, and I've got them listed here. And if I'm reading, you guys are all doing summaries, and I go and look at your summary. If you got those 4 points, I'm going to give you full credit for that. Or if you're getting 3 or 2 of them, would doing something like that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea, and I think another similar idea that I've thought of is outlining the text. Then we're not even depending on full sentences necessarily.
Yeah.
What I'm worried about, because I'm the head of the testing committee in my institution, and so I'm working not only for myself but for basically all the teachers. And what I'm concerned about is that teachers will automatically sort of fall back. There's that fallback setting of grading the grammar. I mean, the moment that you ask them to write a summary, they're just going to, it's just, hit the reset button. I'm going to look at the grammar here.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about that. Although I'm emphasizing at this point that we all need to be creative. And really I don't have any great answers for any of this.
Yeah.
I think that comes with training, because just like you say, just like many teachers that are in your program, they would reset and just look for grammar, because I think I was one of them. But I think because I've been online and I cannot put every single comma that I see or every single typo, so I might just select like a few sentences that are representative of the mistakes and just make a comment on that, which is not graded, but then just look for keywords that are reflecting the 3 or 4 main points that Eddie was talking about. So I think they can get there, but it takes time and it takes training to look at what the students are producing from a different perspective. And I feel like now I can actually spend less time sometimes on the essays, because I'm looking at the structure, I'm looking at the main ideas, the topic sentences, instead of looking at the sentence level. So big picture, small picture. Sentences are, the details, but then you have to look at, are they answering the main points, which are the basis of the summary? So it's a rethinking and training, I think, that it can be accomplished. But again, as you say, by default, we are all going to look at the sentence structure because that's what we're teaching.
I think you also have to, when you're talking about training, both teachers and students, I think you have to put a component in that we haven't talked about and isn't necessarily reflected in this article. And that's the fact that culturally, we're talking about a totally different viewpoint from the American point of view and many, many of our international views. I remember the first time I encountered, I had a really good friend who was Japanese, and he was a school teacher, and he was studying English here in our school, and he had to do an essay, and I said, this is all plagiarized. And he said to me, but why would I say something when all of but my own, when these are the people who are the experts on it? Yeah. And that was the first time I became aware of the fact that, I have a cultural viewpoint that says this is very inappropriate for academia, and it's not shared by probably 90% of the rest of the world. So I think a lot of times when we're talking about the whole idea of plagiarism and cheating with students, we have to approach it first of all from and the teachers as well. And Mike, I'm assuming you're training faculty members of your campus that are not ESL instructors as well. But it's something that we look at and that we have to make sure that they understand, because many of us come with that mindset, but don't even realize it's not the same. It's not a shared mindset with the rest of our student body.
That's a good point, Patty, and just educating students about those things is important. But I mean, I think to some degree, getting beyond the cultural elements, that some things remain the same. It doesn't matter what the culture is, and the key thing is just that validity, right? This what that student has produced is a valid representation of what they can or what they can't do with the language, and that I think that is irrespective of culture, you know, to some degree at least. Yep.
I think another thing to remember that often our students don't seem to share is that what we're trying to do when we measure language proficiency is different from what most of their professors are going to do is when they go onto their university courses, and they're just essentially writing content. So, you know, we don't really care why the bridge collapsed or whatever question.
Yeah.
We care about how they can explain that.
Right, but I mean, it's I mean, part of it is the teaching approach also. I mean, I remember just teaching writing classes and telling students that you're being evaluated not only by the content and the quality of your ideas, but it's also by how you write. And people are making judgments, and professors or people will be making judgments about how you write and how well you write, and the number of mistakes that you make. And I remember having this discussion with students and just literally telling them, you need to make less mistakes. You need to make less errors in what you're doing. It's a definition of proficiency. Proficient people make very few or no errors in that second or third language that they're producing. And having that discussion with students, and they get it and they go, oh, and they start becoming better editors and better, they see better their own the mistakes and things that they're making. So. But it's challenging stuff, and I mean the tasks and the things that we ask students to do. And Mike, you that is a good point about, okay, we need to change. If teachers are saying we need to change what that task is and what we're asking students to do, okay, now we're going to change it, but now we're going to be now we're lowering the validity of what we're doing, which is completely counterproductive. So, you know.
One thing that I've been seeing a lot in the forums that I've been following with not only for ESL but for higher education too, is this, of course, being careful about not over assessing students. But I've been seeing a lot of people recommending using more lower stakes assessments throughout the semester, as opposed to a lot of high stakes ones, because that is a way to discourage cheating. Because if you have lower stakes, then the students don't feel compelled as much. But we do have to be careful though with like how many assessments are we going to have, because you don't want to over assess students either. But I think that's a good point of trying to have more lower stakes ones, and then talk to the teachers. And like Nadia was saying, we have to train not only the teachers but also the students, especially in this new online environment with all the tools being so sophisticated now, that they can be doing the work for them. And that's not the point that we want. We want them to be able to use the tools properly, but do their work, right?
Yeah, it's a good point, and a good, I think, good advice also about, I mean, changing the weighting of some of the assessments and some of the things that we're doing, and you know, and again, what Mike is alluding to too, also with just working with teachers, and sometimes it's reminding people also about some of the validity issues that you know that are important and to keep in mind. Okay, great. Everybody, I'm going to just wrap up in a bit, and I just want to get into screen share and just conclude the slideshow I have here. So we've been talking about some of the challenges and choices with both large scale and classroom assessment. So if you're thinking about coming back next month, let's see what's going on. Next month, we're talking about, on December 16th, we have assessment in the CFR. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. I want to say a big thanks to everybody for joining today. Thanks again to ITEP for sponsoring today's webinar. And